There are millions of people who fled their motherland because of persecution, war, and conflict. But at the same time, there are millions of people who cross borders each day in search of a better life, to reunite with their family, or to look for better money. Countries have the right to restrict immigration, at least in theory. But should they really have the right to do that? Very good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Good evening.
Today, I would like to touch on the topic, should nations and borders be abolished? For those of you who have watched The God Must Be Crazy, the movie touches on the sentiment of possession. The bushman in the movie from Kalahari Desert, a place where there are scant resources, but instead of crying over lack of resources, their lack of advantage over life, they cherish each and everything that God has created for them. There's nothing inherently bad, there's nothing inherently good. All things simply are the way they are supposed to be. Our society lives in a culture where we emphasize on possession. And possession leads to nothing more than just power. Our great-grandfathers, our ancestors came to this land, and there he stood, he looked up and he said, "Here I shall stake my claim of this place. From that mountain onwards all the way to the sea, that this shall be our territory. Anyone who crosses that border, we shall shoot him down." That itself is taking possession. Ladies and gentlemen, who gives us the right to do that when the earth is made for not just us, but all living things? Should nations and borders be abolished? There are a couple of philosophical puzzles that I would like to touch on this topic. And the first one is refugee versus migrant. According to international law, everyone has the right to seek asylum in the face of persecution, war, and conflict. However, there is no automatic right when it comes to seeking asylum due to economic reasons. UNHCR, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, defined refugees as person who fled their country because of war and persecution. These people, their situation is so perilous that they cannot return to their country. UNHCR defines migrant as the person who chooses to leave their country in search of a better place, whether in terms of money, family, or just to retire in a warmer climate. And this itself raises the question of what is the difference between a person who is dying from bombs and a person who is dying from extreme poverty. Now, the first person who is dying from bombs is what UNHCR defined as refugees. The other person who is dying from extreme poverty is what UNHCR defined as migrants. But both are dying. And thus, what is the true meaning of refugees and migrants? And why does refugees have more rights to claim asylum-seeking rights than a person who is dying from extreme poverty? Should nations and borders be abolished? That leads me to the next point. compatriots versus foreigners. Right, so how many of you here feel very strongly for your country? For Singaporeans, you feel very strongly for Singapore. Malaysians, to Malaysia. No, just one. All right.
They are not the humans, right?
It is very widely assumed that we have more obligation to people we deem as compatriots rather than a person we deem as foreigner. And take the instance of victims of flood. We have more claim or more obligation to victims of a flood of our country than victims of a flood that happens on the far side of the other world. For instance, America or Brazil. But say you live right beside a refugee camp. Why then would you have more claim for a person who is from your same country, who lives 200 kilometers away, than a refugee who lives in the refugee camp right next to your house? What then is the definition of compatriot? Is a person who you don't know, but somehow share the same nationality as you, a compatriot? If yes, then what is the difference when the fact is you still don't know them? Just like how you don't know millions of people on this earth. I know, you know, we know that we cheer very loudly for members of Tampines Changkat. But I know that every one of you go out there, when you speak to a non-Toastmasters, you tell them how passionate you are about speaking, about communication, about leadership. And you spoke of Toastmasters as a whole, rather than stating you as Tampines Changkat. But when times are hard, you no longer cheer for us as human beings, us as human race. When times are hard, we start erecting borders. We start staking claim that we are from this country. We are Singaporeans. We are Malaysians. We are Chinese. Should borders and nations be abolished? My last point for this: free exit versus free entry. Now it's a human infringement, human rights infringement, that you are a citizen of countries is not allowed to leave the country. Ronald Reagan, in his speech in Berlin in 1987, delivered a speech to Soviet leader to tell him to tear down the Berlin Wall. And the intuition was because it is to imprison a population behind barbed wire and brick walls is an abomination. Millions have been killed. And so there is a conundrum here, because for it is wrong to allow people to leave a country. Why then it is not equally wrong for people to arrive in a country? Ladies and gentlemen, should borders and nations be abolished? I think for ancestors, or for our forefathers to come to a place and stake a claim to land that they stood on, when this whole earth is made for not just us, but for everyone. I think the better way of doing things should be removing all borders and create a free movement for all people. Create a borderless world. Instead of yelling, Majulah Singapura, why not yell, Majulah Mother Earth? Instead of yelling, Malaysia Boleh, why not yell, Mother Earth boleh. Thank you. So I have 2 to 3 minutes for Q&A session. You guys can.
One question for you.
Yeah.
You mentioned about refugee, migrants, compatriots, foreigners, and free exits and free countries. But what are the benefits can you derive from breaking all these down?
Is that, take for instance what happens in Syria right now, the Syrian civil war, and lots of asylum seekers are going to Europe, but instead of allowing them to enter the country, they were all squeezed into refugee camps. And it is all because everyone has a border into it, and you're entering a border. And so you're not allowed to go into my country. All you have is to reach that refugee camp. And that's where you live to, your conditions, your country get better, and you go back. And I don't think that is how the world that we should be living in. Because everyone have a right to go anywhere they want in this world, because we are the citizens of the earth. And this world is not made for just one particular country people. It's for everyone.
Hi Jerry, I have a question. If you consider that even animals mark their boundaries by leaving their scent around, and this is natural for even the animal kingdom, and personally I think we would all agree that animals seem to have less issue with border control than we do. If they already mark their boundaries, then isn't there a logical sense here then that it is natural for us to do so in a manner that ensures our survival?
Thank you for that wonderful question. Now, I think we are more of a person. We are more of an animal that can think better than just relying on human instinct. And that is why human population has grown so much over the decades. And I think if we continue to rely on just our human instincts by marking our boundaries, our borders, this world is not going to be a better place to live in. It's going to be a better place for a set of group of people, but for the rest of the world, I'm so sorry for that. It's just not going to work that way. I think that's it, right? Oh, one more question.
Okay, so sorry, back to your point about the migrant camps.
Yeah.
You were saying something along the lines of they're being pushed into migrant camps, but don't you think there's a point there? Because there have been reports from certain Swedish people, granted they may be unreliable considering I got them from a random video of YouTube, but there have been reports that the government is suppressing their complaints about the refugees committing crimes and so on. So don't you think that it's safer to put them into a camp rather than just letting them in your country?
But that's just sorry. Yeah, thank you for the question. But that's just judging people based on their nationality or where they come from. Oh, you come from Syria. You're gonna create havoc in my country.
No, but as in what I'm saying is that they have created havoc in the country.
They have, right?
Wouldn't it be safer to stick them away from the other people rather than, try and let them merge together?
Okay.
See, right now. I'll take this offline.
I'll just finish it. So the question was.
It has been past the count.
Okay. So there's something that happened before, right?
Yes.
So you're judging from what happened before, and you're gonna treat the next person who comes along who hasn't done that thing based on what people has done before, and you treat them. Correct.
Once bitten, twice shy.
Yeah, I think, you know what, when the Berlin Wall fell down, right?
Yeah.
You have a word this weekend?
Yeah, no.
That's a debate.
Okay,